Let's see. So these are general principles of the first one of Rawls' conception of well-ordered society. Um, Everyone acceptance can be acceptance based on the belief that those principles are the true principle. Acceptance can be pragmatic, so we would have to, for example, so it needs to be in an Islamic society. Obviously, there are always a level of people's understanding and their acceptance of principles of justice. Firstly, I mean, we would have to accept that Islamic society is based on principles of justice, fundamentally. But we will contest that point because justice is always secondary to metaphysical beliefs. And obviously, then the conception of justice itself is different because political liberalism's justice is zulm as far as Islamic principles of al-adl wal-ihsan is concerned. That's two things. The first thing is need to figure out acceptance. Obviously, even though acceptance have different levels in Islamic society as well, but there's two different conceptions of acceptance: iman and pragmatic acceptance. You can have acceptance based on opportunistic acceptance, and I'm sure if we spend more time, we'll come up with more examples or more types of acceptance. So there's this needs in Rawls's so-called well-ordered society. The first principle has this ambiguity, obviously, which needs to be clarified if it is to be applied to Islamic conception of a well-ordered society. Okay. The second thing is Islamic society is not based on principles of justice in its foundations. Even if we're talking about Islamic principle of justice, why? Because if you base a society primarily on a principle of justice, it means you are building a society which is focused on this world and not on akhirah. The Islamic society is a society which is based on iman bil akhirah. It's a society which is based on ihsan in that way, and not justice. Justice is always secondary. A society based primarily on justice, even those principles, Shari principles of justice, can be called Islamic society formally, but it won't be Islamic society in its spiritual. So the foundation of Islamic society is ihsan and spirituality as such, and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and awliya Allah and mu'mineen, and the brotherhood. It's not based on justice, it is based on brotherhood. Justice is secondary, ihsan is primary. So that's one thing. And the third thing which I mentioned is obviously liberal conception of justice is kufr, is zulm. So we have to clarify which justice, what rationality, as McIntyre say, whose justice and which rationality, or something like that. So these are a few points about his first so-called principle of the well-ordered society. Okay, let's go to the second principle. Actually, I also wanted to add to the first point that the claim that everyone accepts the very same principle is also not true, because Islamic society provides, or at least historically Islamic society provided a social space for other sub-societies to exist. And those sub-societies like Jewish or Hindu or Christian, they didn't have to accept the basic principles of Islamic society as such, or at least not on the basis. I mean, they might have accepted it pragmatically or opportunistically, but they didn't have to accept it in the first sense, for example. So the second point is society's basic structure, that is political and social institutions are publicly known. That is, public believe that they embody the principles of justice mentioned in the first principle of a well-ordered society. But if Islamic political and socialist institution and basic structure of Islamic society is not based primarily on principles of justice, then that rule doesn't follow. But I think we can, for the sake of argument, we can accept that Islamic society probably it is publicly known as Islamic society based in the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the brotherhood of mu'mineen and mu'minat. Um, so those institutions are well known, but they are not equally known because mu'mineen have darajat. Minhum zalimun wa minhum muqtasidun wa minhum sabiqun. At least there are three categories which Quran mentions. So there's much to quibble or question in this principle as well. But I just want to go through all three. So I will just move on. So in a well-ordered society, citizens. So firstly, in Muslim society, there are no citizens. Muslim is not a citizen. Anyway, so effective sense of justice. So citizens believe that these basic structures comply with the principles of justice, and which basically mean they are fulfilling their interests. So that's what establishes their loyalty to this society, and that's why society functions as a well-ordered society. But in Islam, your basic loyalty to Islamic society is based on your loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your loyalty to Islam al-Haq. So it's truth, not justice, which establishes the loyalty to Islamic society. But truth, obviously, is understood at different levels, at those three levels by mu'mineen. So there's always sort of a contest and tension, which society based on, interest-based society might not have, for example. And obviously Muslim society doesn't bind together or shouldn't bind together, and it's not a Muslim Islamic society to that extent, ideally, if it is just based on mutual fulfilling of interest based on just share of material goods, as it is in John Rawls. So I think this covers Rawls' three principles, and I'll stop here and we'll continue from here inshallah next time.